Hello and welcome. My name is Russell Trafford-Jones and this is Broadcast Focus. Thanks for joining me. We are here today, as we always are, to look at the broadcast industry, to talk to people behind the media and entertainment industries. And it's great to have on the show today Neil Howman, who is the publisher of The Flint. How's it going?
Good, thanks. Yes, good, thanks.
Thank you for being on the show. We have talked about The Flint before because your almost namesake Neil was on, Neil Romanak, talking, and we had a great conversation talking about the publication and sustainability in general. It was fun, and we talk about it quite often on the show because it matters, and I think increasingly people are realizing it matters. And I guess, given you're the publisher of The Flint, you probably think it matters too. Perhaps just reintroduce us to The Flint. What's the publication has more of a purpose than some other publications. It'd be good to hear your thoughts on how it came to be and your aims.
I think it's probably a good time to be talking about it because we've just passed our sort of 1 year anniversary, which in publishing is a miracle anyway these days.
It's not your first rodeo, though.
Not my first rodeo. I'm not fresh out of college. I know many people are probably thinking that, but I'm not. No, so the conversation with Neil, the other Neil, probably started in about July, August of 2023. Now, previous to that, I'd been increasingly interested in this emerging conversation about sustainability, which maybe we'll get onto definitions a bit later, but an increasing conversation about this. And I'd hosted a couple of webinars and conversations about this in any, really just to deepen my understanding of what the issues were, or what the issues were that people were engaging with in the media and entertainment space. I'd obviously been aware of Neil professionally for probably about the past 15 years, one way and another. I know he'd edited a number of publications, and I've worked in publishing and PR for a while, so always coming into contact with people who were reporting on the industry. And I was also aware that he'd moved to be working at BAFTA Albert for a while, obviously focusing very heavily on sustainability in production.
Yes, we talked through the role of Albert, what he did there.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden he wasn't working for them. And I've been formulating an idea that I really thought that there was a need and certainly a gap for a publication, an online information hub, if that's the right word, that was reporting on this emerging conversation across the media and entertainment space. And I spoke to Neil about that, and he may well have told you that, but he'd also been jotting down a bit of a blueprint for how something like that might work. So that was the genesis of it. And soft launch at IBC 2023, telling people about what we were intending to do. And obviously I'd been aware of a number of companies and individuals who were displaying a real commitment and an understanding of the issues. And that's the genesis, the origin story of The Flint. And here we are. We're a year later on, having learned a lot, having really got an understanding that you start talking to someone about their technologies, for example, or you start talking to someone just about their company, and they're pretty straight up. They say, it doesn't really impact on us. We work in software, and it goes to some other guy, and they're the ones responsible. But before long, you start pulling at these little threads of stories, and before long, everybody's got what we would call a sustainability story, or something that impacts on environmental, social, or governance aspects, how they configure their working day, their working space, how they, respond to colleagues' various lifestyle needs. And it's all of a piece. It's how we wish to and need to configure our industry for the future. Really. Yeah. I know it all sounds a bit grand and a bit deep, but that underpins a lot of what we're about.
How much is about amplifying what's already there? versus educating about what needs to be done, or is it not that? Perhaps it's not that easy to differentiate, because you've got events and you've got articles, and I assume some of them are news articles, and some of them perhaps are more. It's not really thought leadership as much as just an article about a topic.
I really do think it's a bit of a combination of all those things. I think education is key to most things. It's most people's ways forward in many ways. I think that what we wanted to do for the Flint was provide a platform which amplifies great work going on in whatever area of the media and entertainment space it may be happening, with the thought or the hope that other people in other areas of the industry might be able to read that information and be inspired to think about it in their own neck of the woods. And what we were noticing, and I'm sure Neil Romanek probably mentioned this, is that there's a lot of great work going on, but in pockets, in silos. And because this is an urgent situation, certainly on the climatic side and the impact of carbon emissions and energy consumption and behaviors that really need to be changing now, years ago, essentially, that it was bigger than just one section. So we just really wanted to amplify and shine a light on great work that people are doing, perhaps in film and TV production, that people perhaps in streaming were doing great stuff, but there wasn't always that conversation going on between them and sharing best practice. But obviously, with any emerging conversation, there's going to be a variety of different opinions. The thought leadership and the opinion pieces are just equally as valid there. It's all part of the same piece. But one other thing that we wanted to try and do was work with companies, large and small, to help them articulate their story. There's many companies don't quite know where to start, I think, and we were wanting to try and help them start somewhere.
Yes, that makes sense. And I spoke to Lisa Collins recently on the show, and she highlighted that her work at the MTSS, which I know you also support, some of that was about having a conversation with particularly a smaller company, and they don't perhaps want to speak up because it's not quite finished yet, and we haven't really done what we want to do. So they don't want to speak out until there's something really substantial to talk about. But then without that, it feels like no one's doing anything because there's this kind of silence in the industry.
I don't know if it's been mentioned to you, Russell, but this green hushing phenomenon.
Not by name, no.
No, it's a newish term by me. Obviously, there's greenwashing, where there is various levels of concealment, whether it's deliberate or unintentional, and that's a debate in its own right. But green hushing is precisely that point you were talking to. There's a hesitancy about if anybody sticks their head above the parapet and says, we are doing this, and it's about how much waste we recycle in our offices, and there's a real anxiety that it's going to be laughed at as not being tokenism or not being enough, or so and so over there is doing 10 times more than what you're. So it's this hesitancy that there are people who are really taking this issue seriously and really addressing it, but don't want to talk about it for fear of incoming criticism of various types. And we don't dismiss that. We're not flippant about the reasons why somebody's hesitant, but we want to try and encourage them and help them, that if it's coming from a genuine place to affect real change, no matter how small to start with, we want to be there to help amplify that, So that's green anyway.
We'll keep using that term whenever there's some sort of hesitance, and there can be many reasons for it. And so I think some of them they're valid concerns, but I think perhaps there's a disproportionate desire to keep quiet, which perhaps should be rebalanced.
We'd encourage people to speak out.
Have you noticed that perhaps you didn't expect over the first year other conversations or types of interactions that you didn't anticipate?
I think when you plunge into something like this, there's a certain aspect of a gamble, isn't there? And I think the thing that I've most learned that has dawned on me slowly is not only that hesitancy and the various reasons for it that I've just mentioned, but we're in the media and entertainment space, and a lot of the people that we talk to are kind of vendors. They're making pieces of technology.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the sustainability aspect of that is a secondary. Obviously, their main raison d'etre is to make clever kit for the processing, the ingesting, the delivery of content. Some of them are really engaged in integrating a sort of sustainability aspect to it at the very conception of their technologies. And of course, that is what we really want to encourage people to be thinking about as they go. But of course, their primary objective, and especially in a very challenging marketplace, I think, is to make money. And it is quite difficult sometimes to get them to really address the sustainability aspect. And of course, we can't beat them over the head. And I'm very conscious that the Flint doesn't want to be finger wagging at people and saying, you must do this, and then shaming them in some way to change. We're not about that. But I perhaps underestimated how challenging it can be at times to get people to really engage with that in a way that they're happy to then talk about. And it is, of course, a secondary activity to manufacturing cool pieces of kit.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
So something interesting earlier about software, and this came up when Lisa and I were talking through this Sony sustainability report based on a survey of their contacts list, and they said a lot of I think it was about 25% said a major blocker was the fact they couldn't find any or enough sustainable products or services. And I thought that was interesting because I think they're two different things in a sense that it's a challenge and it requires investment. I'm not trying to diminish it, but if you have a product to go through your whole manufacturing process and work out where you can use recycled this and reduce that, that's quite that's something that people can understand, and it's almost a tangible thing. When you're doing a SaaS platform, then really you want to be able to say, boast about it, or at least you want to take it seriously. But it feels to me like it's almost impossible to do that, because you can say that your code is efficient, but who knows? And you may not even have any control over how it's running. It seems much more challenging thing to be able to say, hand on heart, this is a sustainable SaaS platform.
We're getting into a really knotty area here, because of course, I mean, it feeds into these conversations I've had this year. We just make bits of software where we're not taking tons of raw materials. It's all that. But you then get into the conversation about the cloud and on-prem, and I'm sure we might touch on the whole AI thing. This relies on increasing amounts of energy in data centers. And this is something I'm involved in, the greening of streaming. I volunteer some services to that, and I'm on one of their working groups about how they get their message out. But they are in the streaming side of things, really pursuing this idea of we need data. It needs to be data informed. And they are launched a number of initiatives which are really looking to get some real-time data. We're not talking about the VW emissions scandal of a while back. It's not in a lab in ideal situations and ideal lighting to watch your 4K screen, and then there's some manufactured and manufacturers' data to go out there in lab conditions. It's real people watching TV in real situations and trying to get that data in there. Until we have that, it's always going to be an issue, what you've just said about, are we really sustainable? And I think that is the interconnectedness of all of this that we're really talking about. It's an issue that is so much bigger than one massive hyperscaler, for example, to solve. And it's going to take a collaborative approach and an awful lot more goodwill and transparency about data before we can make some serious appraisals of just how efficient or inefficient various aspects and various technologies are. There are certain big players in our industry, Russell, who would have you believe that they are doing everything that's heading towards a more sustainable future. Well, we just don't know because they're not that transparent with their data. And well, I think human beings' solution here, human beings being human beings, are also part of the problem.
I've always found it quite frustrating that you can't ask your PC how much power it's using, because the power supply doesn't know, it doesn't report. It would be fraught with, as you say, misreporting. But on the other hand, it's just not even there. But that's hard enough. If you've got your own PC, you can stick it into an MDU and it'll tell you how much is coming through the plug. That's fine.
Yeah.
With the cloud, it seemed particularly tricky because obviously everything's basically sharing a computer. So somehow you've got to find out exactly how much power that process is using. And then also track through all of the API calls to the other stuff. And I guess it depends the difference between a data center and the cloud per se. The whole point of the cloud in its biggest sense is that there's actually an ecosystem of APIs and software around that you can chat to and get information for free, so to speak. Whereas if you're just running servers in a lab, you've got to do all of that. You're responsible for everything that piece of software does, and so there's less support. So that means you've got more control.
Sure.
But on the other hand, you have to do more. So I don't have an issue with people using the cloud to its fullest extent, but I'm just highlighting how awfully tricky it must be to tease all of the information out.
I just think of it in a visual way. Oh, we just chuck it up there and we don't have to think about it anymore. But there is a real consequence to this, and we just don't. All these technologies are absolutely fantastic, but there is consequences to them, and it's glossed over at times, I think.
Well, the opposite happens as well, though. I think because you're concentrating all of your kit in one place, it makes it easy to count the aggregate. And I don't think anybody knows whether the numbers are big or small. They're certainly big, but does it matter? Because if 50% of the UK's companies have got rid of their server room, and that's now all in one of 6 data centers, then you'd expect those data centers to have a massive amount of power and therefore to use a massive amount of water. But that might be much more efficient than everybody in Soho having their own little basement and trying to air condition that as well.
That's very true. And I don't feel fully qualified to say what the extent of all this is. The only thing I would say on this data center question is that we have this thing called AI, which everybody's talking about, and that to deliver as much AI that is being talked about in just in the media and entertainment space, the amount of additional data centers required is staggering, and the amount of additional energy required is staggering. And I just, from a sort of layman's, I'm not particularly technical person, but I'm interested in these matters on the sideline looking and saying, I'd really like to know a bit more about how much power they are drawing down and where all that power is coming from, because colleagues more learned than I am will tell you that there's all the energy, all the power has already been bought up for these by the big players. So how does that figure?
Yeah, but we've seen the first moves, haven't we, this week, I think it was, with Google signing up with a private power generation company. And that makes sense, because you can say what you will about nuclear power, but in terms of carbon emissions, it's going in the right direction. And also, it's self-providing effectively. And so they're going to be able to say, yeah, we're not drawing on the public grid, and avoid that kind of those kind of complaints. But I think the problem, again, it's another transparency issue. It would be really useful to have some form of idea of, if I ask it, what's 2 + 2? Am I using a megawatt hour of power, or is it a couple of,
that would be useful.
Like a AA battery? I don't know. I don't have no idea.
Precisely the point I'm making. It's just transparency, so that we can respond in a more informed way.
Yeah.
Develop a more informed position on this. And instead of scrabbling around for pieces of data and working our way through all the sort of clouds of obfuscation that we certainly encounter. And unfortunately, it's the bigger players who are often the people who are hardest to disseminate what's going on there.
I think the Google move is an interesting one. Overall, I think it sounds like a good idea, but it seems to bring up another question. So, like, Google have invested in undersea infrastructure to make sure that, particularly between the UK and Europe and the US, they're not constrained by lack of internet. So that's both good, but it also means they're in control of some of that. And they've got enough money to get ahead, so to speak, in power generation. So again, that allows them to step up. And of course, I'm sure they've done this out of competitive advantage as well. So if it feels like they're very much the epitome of a hyperscaler, and there's a lot of power in the governmental sense that goes along with that.
Other hyperscalers are available, of course, but
they just may not have the fission reactors.
Yes, indeed. I think your summary is absolutely right there. And so much remains to be seen. The problem, the luxury we don't have, in my opinion, is time. We are really up against it. We only have to look out of our windows most of the time and take a walk outside to understand that time is not a luxury we have. And I think all I'm advocating for is more transparency, more informed decisions. And you have to, understanding the whole competitive advantage, and it's a business, but this issue, if you want to call it just one issue, is so much bigger than any one, even enormous hyperscaler, because the impact and implications on each and every one of us are so much bigger than that, So that's my request, plea, call to action, is people need to come clean, forgive the pun, on all sorts of things in order to
I agree,
advance the conversation.
Next month, I'm looking forward to having both you and the other Neil on the show, talking about the Nordics work you're doing, which again is looking partly at power generation, because I think famously there's a lot of, what's it called, hydroelectric
power and
renewables.
Green energy, renewable energy.
What's the aim of that work? Is it to understand, do a baseline measurement to say what the general place looks like?
That's a rather high ideal. I think everything that we've done in the first year has been a sort of dipping one's toe in the water to see what engages with people. Because, of course, there is, with something like the Flint and something like sustainability, you have a wish list, all those things you would want to achieve and want to, like transparency and people talking more and sharing their data and all of that, compared to what is practical. And also the fact is that we have to pay our bills as well. So we're trying to find that sort of, from a publishing point of view, trying to find that sweet spot. What we wanted to try and do, because we think it's all about inspiring other people in different parts of the industry to think about their own businesses and their own product. We thought we would do a regional focus. And I think the natural place to go is our perceptions of the Nordic region, from Iceland all the way over to Denmark and arguably the Baltic states as well, was that we have a sense that they're very progressive, they're very ahead of the curve, and from the cradle they are taking care of their environment more. We get a sense that works into all sort of elements of industry. But of course, however, they drill a lot of oil in the North Sea. They are a very wealthy, generally speaking, smaller, wealthier countries who consume a lot because people with more income consume more things. So we just thought it would be an interesting place to start. It's a combination of some news stories from that region, some in-depth investigations of various companies and what they're doing, a couple of case studies. So it's very much a dipping the toe in the water to see if this would be an interesting template for future regional focus, just to see the good and the challenges, the not so good, where are the pinch points for those, but just sharing stories, best practice, business, technology, how they tell stories. So we've got a range of really interesting things and initiatives. And I'm very glad we started there, because I really would say, in general, the Nordic regions are really very much at the vanguard of, because it seems to be part of the national identity, is to be really thinking about the environment people live in. We're getting close to completion, and hopefully, yes, by the time the two Neils. By the way, I always think that's a bit of a sustainability move on our part. You get one name and two people. Sort of. But yes, by the time
we agree on the spelling, that would be helpful.
Oh well, yeah. There you go. The human aspect again, Russell. Just can't agree on anything.
Okay, look, we've agreed that we'll come together again and have a chat.
Yeah, looking forward to that conversation. We'll have learned a lot as well.
Good. What I want you to do, Neil, is take a note of the subscriber count at the moment, and we need to make sure that it's higher by the time we next talk. So anybody listening should make sure that they are subscribed. We will be checking the delta. Pop a like on the video, and I would just like to say thank you to Becky and Fiona for helping me put this show together in general, and very much to you, Neil, for spending some time with me today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Russell. I hope it's been enlightening to some extent.
It's been enlightening and fun, so thank you very much.